Hi Nick, how's it going?
All good, all good. Second podcast, which is always good.
Podcast in the
It's
books.
a good sign. It's a good sign. It's a good sign. So the first one must have had more than our 4 listeners that we had predicted.
It was between 300 and 400 listeners overall. So
right,
I'm okay with that. You know?
Yeah, I'm okay with that for the first one.
Again, shout out to my mum who was delighted with the shout out the last time. I'm pretty sure she listened back to it about 300 or 400 times, so that could explain it.
You see, you've made a rookie mistake now. You've given a shout out to her at the very beginning of the podcast, so she only has to listen to the first 20 seconds and then she can switch off. You gotta leave your shout outs right till the end so that we get listeners all the way to the end.
Well, I tell you what, someone you know and someone I know are going to get a shout out somewhere in this podcast, probably near the end. So, geez, you'll just all have to stay tuned.
Okay, that's all good.
So get the thinking caps on for that.
So what are we're discussing this week? Something slightly different.
Yeah, so we're going to discuss the end of the SHD, the Strategic Housing Development process that the government introduced in 2017. So we're going to discuss what the end of that means, because that's coming up in February of 2022. So you have some insights on that. I have some insights on that I took from the web. I'm not as well versed on this topic as you are, but hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, I would be versed well on it, and we've seen it a huge amount of work over the last 3.5 years coming through. So hopefully I've learned a bit over the last 3.5 years with regard to it. I do have to give a shout out to the better equipment we're using now. You see the microphone, which is a big improvement after the abuse, as you said. So all good.
Yeah, so we'll get into that. Yeah, a quick note on the microphone. We were hurled abuse from not anyone external, just people within the team now that like hurling abuse at us from the sound quality of our last podcast. So at Janie Mac, the feedback, we'll call it feedback. I think one of them is Nick speaking through an old wire telephone.
Yeah, it wasn't the May West now, but you might as well just start off small and introduce something new each week. Look, I even have notes this week, which is quite impressive. So
I know.
Yeah, I know. Last week we just winged it, but now that we're getting professional, we better start putting notes in and proper equipment. So maybe each week we'll introduce a new piece of equipment. You never know. We'll have built a sound studio out the back by the end of the year.
Yeah, we're getting there, but some of that abuse now was fun. I think Marcus, our project manager, was saying you'd get better sound out of 2 cans and a piece of string, I was solid now.
We're on the road to being better, so that's the main thing. We should probably stop rambling and get into it. Do you need to do something about telling people where to listen to this? Do you?
Again, we're getting more professional, so I should probably start that at the start. But here we go.
You should probably.
You're very welcome to episode 2 of 3D Design Bureau's podcast. Again, we shoot the breeze on all things surrounding the AEC sector here in Ireland and abroad, and hopefully we'll be getting some property pros to discuss different topics, especially around planning, around daylight and sunlight, around all things architectural visualization and 3D and the property market here in Ireland. So if you are looking for us, you can find us wherever you find your podcasts. So on Spotify, on iTunes, on all things, wherever you find them, we're on them. We're also on YouTube, where you can see our lovely faces. So again, if you're in any way squeamish, do not watch that one.
I think you're going to have to probably shorten that intro a little bit. I'm going to be honest. So,
is it too long?
It might be a little bit long, but anyway, let's crack on. It's all about the small changes make a big difference. So we'll try and improve each week.
Good stuff. So yeah, Nick, as I was saying, we're going to discuss the SHD, the Strategic Housing Development, which is ending on February 25th, I believe, of 2022. So that's been in place for the last 4 years. It was introduced in 2017 as a fast track system for developments with over 100 units, residential units, or over 200 student bed spaces. So that's coming to an end. So what's your thoughts on that?
Good and bad. I think with regard to the business itself, we've done well over the last 3 to 4 years as the SHD process took off. We've got a lot of business out of it, and we've grown because of it. But it has come with a lot of hurdles and stumbling blocks. So it has been a challenge. And I think on the client side, I think a lot of clients, if the truth be known, will be very happy to see the end of it because of the pitfalls of it, namely around judicial reviews, and which we'll get into, I know. So I think there's going to be mixed feelings about it, and there's certain dates that have to be hit now, which is going to cause a lot of stress, I'd say, for all consultants who are involved in SHD. From I think October the end of October is the first deadline where you have to submit for a pre-app. So if you haven't gone through the pre-application process yet, you have to submit by the end of October. And then any scheme that has entered into the pre-app stage has to lodge by the end of December. And then any development that is entering into the pre-app stage for the end of October has to be submitted by the end of February. So I think we're going to see it being very, very busy up around the end of October, around the end of December, and the end of February. And I think all consultants are feeling it now, with a lot of clients looking to try and get their SHDs in on time, which is, probably not going to be feasible for all of them, but it is going to be pretty manic, because around Christmas time anyway for us is always really manic, because people have this psychological mindset that Christmas, everything has to get lodged before Christmas, but really the clock stops because the planning authorities shut down around Christmas. So, but there's a psychology around getting lodged before Christmas. So it's going to be pretty hairy now, I'd say, around December. But we're already planning for it, and we're only sort of mid-late September. We would generally plan for in around our Christmas period, our really busy time of Christmas, from around the beginning of November, but we're pulling it back and planning now because we just know how busy it's going to be. So yeah, it's going to be a big change. As I said, I do think it's going to be welcomed, the new vehicle for large developments. What happens on that front, who knows,
Yeah, so obviously there is going to be a new system in place that's going to be happening in February of 2022, which is the large scale residential developments, which is going to be quite similar to the SHD process, but there is a few changes. I believe you were speaking to a planning consultant this morning, Nick, and what are those changes in the new system, the LSRD?
I think the LSRD, okay. So the LSRD being put down on paper. I will admit that I haven't got a very in-depth knowledge of it, but I do know that there will be similarities. So you're still going to have your pre-app meeting with the council. I think the major change to it, there's two major changes. I think more power is going to be given to local authorities with regard to development. So I think they're going to have more of a say in the actual development and what the design of that will be, more so than what the SHD process does. Maybe local authorities are feeling that they're kind of cut out of the loop, and that a lot of the decision making is taken away from them with the SHD process, with it going straight to the board. So a lot more decision making we put on the local authority. But one of the major, I was speaking to a good client of ours and a friend of mine this morning, and she was saying that the major thing is the material contravention. So when you lodge through an SHD, if you're contravening any of the items in the development policies, you can put in a statement, material contravention statement, under the current SHD process as to why you're not adhering to certain items, with a justification, and then it's up to the board if they want to accept that justification, whereas that's going to be gone now once it goes back to the LSRD. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I think there's, again, like the SHD, there's going to be mixed views, and I don't think anyone knows how it's going to pan out until it actually gets put into play, and until a few developments have gone through the actual system of the LSRD. So it'll be, yeah, it's going to be, it's just an ever-changing area, the whole area of planning, and it is a challenge. It's become a lot more challenging, I think, in the last 2 to 3 years, in particular in the last probably 1 to 2 years, particularly around, you know, the area of judicial review and the right to appeal SHDs, and that wasn't there. So the board would give, you know, a decision whether it was a grant or a refusal, and then there was no right for you can right to appeal to the board on it. But then the judicial review kicked in, and it was never there for the purposes that it's being used for at the moment, where even administrative errors on a planning application, you can judicially review a planning application, a development, and that's just caused an absolute nightmare for everyone involved, consultants and developers and our clients and stuff. So yeah, I think everyone will be glad once. I think there is talk as well, isn't there, of the new legislation around the JR, and to remove administrative errors from it, and that it be more substantial grounds for JR. I think that's really needed, because I think everyone's kind of at their wits' end with the JR process now, and having to double and triple and quadruple check, and getting, like, there's some developments we're working on, Kev, that, you know, there's 3 or 4 legal counsels reviewing planning documentation before it's lodged, you know. So it's kind of moved away from nearly a planning application to nearly a legal application at this stage. So I think everyone's going to be glad to see the back of that.
Yeah, so they're looking at bringing in a new form of judicial review, or new measures for it in Q2 of 2022. That seems a bit ambitious. Like one of the things they're trying to do is get all the local authorities to go for e-planning, so no printed paper, which should reduce. You know, you were saying that a planning consultant had thousands of euro worth of print material.
Yeah, it's just insane. Like, some of the stuff that I've seen over the last year or two, you know, in terms of the amount of printed documentation to go in for a planning application is just monstrous, you know. Like, my reservations about whether they get stuff set up under the timelines that they're saying is, we're still submitting. Okay, they are trying to move to the e-portal for planning applications, but they haven't got there yet. You know, so they have these ambitions about setting up perfect e-portals for Q1 of 2022, as you said. Like, realistically, that's not going to happen. And I just wonder, is some of the stuff that's been put out for the Housing for All, scheme, the Housing for All document from government, whether a bit of its lip service. We all know that the planning system is a little bit broken, and the housing system is definitely broken, and change needs to happen and can't come quick enough. It just, you know, it's great to have it down on paper, but it needs to be implemented for all concerned.
Yeah, definitely. And they are talking about a new division in the High Court dealing with planning matters. So at the moment, it's just tied up in all matters in the High Court. So they're talking about a new division specifically for planning. So it should be a more streamlined process.
You'd like to think so, but then if you look at how challenging it has been for the board to review SHD applications, particularly when the pandemic hit, there was a delay with applications, and then suddenly there was a whole tsunami of applications going in. The board couldn't handle it, so they didn't have the resources. So when they say they're going to put a new department in to review stuff, I'd always have my sort of reservation about whether they'll implement that, because it has been very challenging all around at government level to get the resources in place, particularly at board level, you know. So it'll be interesting to see if they do deliver on the bits and pieces that they have said that they're going to deliver on.
And with that, look, this will all come out in the wash when the new system is in place, obviously. But I suppose looking back at the SHD process, Was it a success in your opinion? Obviously, it was brought in 2017 to fast track housing. We desperately need housing. There's a bit of a housing crisis going on in Ireland, especially Dublin. You hear all the stories of people trying to buy houses, and it's next to impossible at the moment. So, do you think it was a success, or was it a bit of a flop and a failure, the SHD process?
I wouldn't say it was a flop and a failure, but I think on paper again, and that's why I've said it, on paper, this new large-scale residential development road that we will use for large-scale developments looks on paper to be good, but the SHD looked on paper to be good, but then a loophole was found with JRs, and that's caused a massive problem with SHDs. So I think in principle it was very good. There's very mixed opinions as to whether it was successful or not, or whether it sped up the process. The JR system, the JR problems around SHDs definitely caused massive delays. You know, once you get a leave for JR, a developer can be up to a year waiting to get to court in order to argue it and to get a decision on the JR, on whether the JR is upheld and the development quashed, or whether it's rejected and the development is granted. So like, that's a year that can be waiting for a large development. So from that perspective, the JRs have massively held up things, and there's been a huge success rate with leave for JRs. So I think it's up over 90% if you on developments that have been given. So you apply for a leave for JR. So if you've got a development and you're objecting against it on the grounds on the judicial review, asking for judicial review, you ask for the leave for JR. If that's granted by the judge, you then could be 12 months, up to 12 months waiting to have a hearing. And I think the success rate is over 90% for those leave for JR. So that's absolutely massive, you know. And I think you had the stats earlier about the amount of SHDs that have fallen foul of this, you know. So do I think it's been a success? I don't know. I honestly don't know. It definitely was. It was a vehicle for it to be a success, but I think you'll find the vast majority of people are going to say it hasn't been a success.
Yeah, on that, a quick stat on what's been delivered. So out of 210 SHDs granted permission, only 72 of them, so roughly a third, proceeded to construction since 2017. Yeah,
now in fairness, that stat there, like, that's a huge stat. Like, if you take the JR out of that, that's still very low numbers actually breaking ground. But it'd be interesting to know, in the 2/3 that haven't hit ground, why they haven't hit ground. Is it because the vast majority are tied up in legal issues, or is it to do with funding, or is it to do with holding on to land, like developers getting planning, holding on to land, looking at flipping the land for a better price because they've taken the risk of getting planning, spent the money, and now they're going to flip it. So it'd be interesting to know what that 2/3 is made up of. I'd imagine a good portion of it is to do with legal reviews on developments, you know, because that has been a huge talking point over the last number of months, and in particular for us around daylight sunlight. You know, that the goalposts have literally moved from one side of the pitch to the other with daylight sunlight and methodology, and what was acceptable in terms of methodology say 12 months ago is no longer acceptable now because of decisions over the last 6 to 9 months with regard to schemes. So we've been kind of with daylight sunlight, which is a very technical area of planning, that's now under the spotlight. It's one of the go-to documents for planning, and that's we need to make sure that we're covered in what we do, and we're very good at what we do, but it is a real challenge, and it feels I feel like we've been on floating ice with daylight sunlight because of JR and because of how things have changed over the last 9 to 12 months. It has been, you know, it's sort of like a big sheet of ice that's breaking and you're jumping from one piece to the next. So it has been challenging. That's only one element of planning. So you can imagine a planning consultant, and they have to be, you know, having an overriding view of all areas of the planning, including daylight, sunlight. So it's been very challenging for them as well. So I think if the JR element can be fixed, I don't think it'll be fixed properly, but if they do get the legislation through that removes this administrative error issue away from it, and that you have to have more substantial grounds for asking for leave for JR, I think that'll make a huge difference, much more so than switching from an SHD process to large-scale residential development process.
Yeah, and I suppose with the local authority involved at a very, very early stage with this new LSDR process, will that filter out ridiculous kind of applications because they kind of have to sign off to see if it's feasible over an 8-week period? Like one that comes to mind is the 45-story development on the Docklands by Johnny Ronan. Will that kind of filter out applications that are just not feasible whatsoever?
That's the idea behind it, I suppose, and that you're getting more buy-in with the local authority, where, as I said earlier in the podcast, that I think the local authorities may feel that they've lost say in development. And so I think this gives it back to them, and I think developers and clients and stuff are going to have to work more closely with them. I don't know, like you referenced the large development there by the Ronan Group. I honestly don't know. I couldn't comment on whether they would have had more success going with straight under the large scale residential development process, because I'm not sure if that went under SHD. I'm sure it did, but I'm not sure if they'd have more success or not, so it's going to boil down to getting buy-in from the local authority before you actually lodge your new LSRD to the board, because that's the same process. You still have that pre-application process with the local authority, but now you'll have to take on board much more what they are advising before you go and submit to the board. But ultimately you are still submitting to the board for them to make a decision, but you'd like to think that a lot more due diligence may be, I think the idea will be that a lot more due diligence is done on the scheme before it goes to the board, if that makes sense. Yeah,
that makes sense. And I suppose with the end of the SHD, you mentioned it briefly at the start of the podcast. What does that mean for us here in 3D Design Bureau and other design consultants? Is it going to be is there going to be lots of developers looking to get an application in through the SHD process before it comes to an end? Is it going to be busy, is all I'm asking?
Yeah, it's going to be busy. Look, it's busy already. We can see it. It's already started to ramp up. We have started to nearly close the door on any new anyone that hasn't entered into the pre-app stage at this stage or started the process to get the pre-app in by the end of October, I think is realistically not going to hit it unless it's just over the 100 mark of units. It's going to be very difficult. So for example, if someone decides now, right, let's go the SHD route, and they are only at feasibility stage of a scheme, you may as well forget that. You'll have to go the new route. If someone is close to submitting for a pre-app and needs certain documentation, like say the verified views and or the daylight, sunlight, and or whatever other reports from other consultants, they may have time to get it in by the end of October in order to submit your full application by the end of February. But I am starting to hear that some clients and some schemes are deciding, do you know what, let's go the large scale residential development route rather than the SHD, take a little bit of pressure off. That said, I've also heard rumours recently that there is a stumbling block on the large scale residential development in getting it through and getting it finalised. If that is true, I'm not saying it is, it's just a rumour I heard, but if that is true, then that's going to throw the cat among the pigeons, because then you're going to have schemes that may fall between the stools and go into limbo. Do they go, if they decide not to go the SHD route, what route are they going to go? Because there has to be a mechanism there for them to go. So if that gets delayed, for example, if that got delayed out to mid next year, then what happens then? What route do you take for schemes that are over 100 units? Do we revert back to the old way of doing it, which is not too dissimilar from the large scale residential development route, or do we wait and see until that route is actually up and running? So let's hope that's not the case. Let's hope that the process is up and running so that there's a smooth, seamless transition. Because if it is true and there is a problem with it, it doesn't inspire much confidence in the sector with all the facts that you've been mentioning there, and you know, they want to have it all e-planning by next year and all this sort of stuff. You're kind of going, well, if you can't even get the new process up and running, what hope have we got of getting the e-planning up and running? So I think hopefully it's not, and hopefully it was only a bad rumor, but we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose.
Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. Now, Nick Polly
spreading
rumours.
Exactly, yeah, spreading rumours. Suddenly you get phone calls. What are you saying? What are you talking about? It's all there, you know. So I will just caveat it and say, look, I'm not a planning consultant myself, you know, and I do call a number of planning consultants who are probably friends now and try and get advice off them during, you know, every project that we work on, and to get feedback from them and what their take is on it, who'll be far better versed at digging deep into this whole process. But just I suppose it's just my own opinion and what we're seeing here in 3DDB and what we're experiencing, what we have experienced over the last number of years in particular.
Good stuff. Well, I think what we need to do now, Nick, is get a planning consultant on, so it's not me and you chatting. You know, it's someone that has the hard facts, no spreading rumours.
Yeah, exactly. Well, isn't that I suppose that'd be great. Like we mentioned in the first podcast, and we'll probably mention in every podcast we do now, but getting other industry professionals on is the goal for this, you know, to try and shed light on certain aspects like this. So hopefully when we get up past the 10 listeners, that we'll start being able to put out the invites to people and see if they're interested in joining us. We might have to get the tech a little bit more advanced than what we have at the moment, though, Kev. But look, Rome wasn't built in a day, Kevin. Rome was not built in a day.
This is it. I'm sure we could send out different professionals the old 2 cans and a piece of string, and we get it going from there. But
yeah, keep it simple. Keep it simple, stupid.
Exactly. So yeah, more than happy to do that. If you do want to get on the podcast and you're in the AEC sector in the property world, do get in touch with us. Nick, I'm going to need that shout out that you're going to give us.
A shout out? Oh, I've totally
who's the shout out?
Who's the shout out to? I will give it. You know, we'll give a shout out to. Do we have to give it to an industry professional or just a Joe Soap that we know? It'll have to be an industry professional.
I know it could be absolutely anyone now. It's just because they've all been waiting now.
Do you know what? Do you know what? Then I'll make my wife listen till the end. So I'll give a shout out to my wife Elsa, who really is puts up with an awful lot of my crap and the long hours I work and stuff like that. So I'll give a shout out to Elsa and see if she listens. We'll see.
Say nothing to her now. Don't tell her she got a shout out. And if she comes to you now at the very end, it's like...
I told her last week that we were starting to do podcasts, and she just didn't even answer. She just looked at me and sort of the eyes rolled up to heaven. I was like, oh, right. Just turned around on her heels.
She's dead right. I think we're very good at
actually,
that in Ireland.
No, do you know what she did say? You've got time for podcasts. So I didn't broach the subject again since, so I won't be saying it to her. But if she listens, yeah, she be my rock now behind me. So all good.
Good stuff. No, happy with that. I think we're very good at that now in Ireland, is hurling abuse at people trying something new. I think I got a bit last night saying that RTE were headhunting me now for my presenting skills, you know?
Indeed. Well, you go off and look for a job in RTE. Might make my life easier.
I won't say who said that now. I'm done with the call outs now. Mum got the call out at the very start, so I'm happy enough with that. But Nick, stuff. I think that's us yep. done. So a few formalities. If you are looking to get in touch or have any topics you'd like us to discuss, do get in touch with us on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn at 3D Design Bureau, and we'll try to talk about those topics. So happy enough with that, Nick.
All right. Take it easy. Talk to you again.
See you next time. Bye now.
Laters.